I suck at jiu-jitsu. How do I suck less at jiu-jitsu?
I guess to suck less.
The diabolical leader of the headlock squad.
Hey everybody, this is Josh McKinney, and I just want to welcome you to the newest episode of the ISAJJ Jiu-Jitsu show and wish you guys a happy 4th of July. And so, as you guys may have guessed from the title, we are going to do an American Jiu-Jitsu discussion. We're really not going to do any type of debate. We are really just going to look at, kind of in my opinion, the influences of America and of jiu-jitsu being so big in America right now and what that has kind of done for jiu-jitsu. We're going to talk about the positives and the negatives, but we're going to do something weird, something I never ever do. We're going to start out today's episode with a little quote, and I really liked this one, and so I thought I would share it with you guys on 4th of July. America is not just a country, it's an idea, a relentless pursuit of dreams against all odds, embodying the grit and determination that turns struggle into strength. Much like in jiu-jitsu and life, the greatest victories often come from overcoming the toughest challenges. ChatGPT 4. And the thing is, we are going to talk about, we're going to talk about technology. We're going to probably talk about ChatGPT a little bit. We're going to talk about all of it. But I thought that a great place to start this story, a great place to just start this discussion is with the Dirty Dozen. And so if you do not know who the Dirty Dozen are, you can look them up on the old Google machine. Very easy. Maybe I'll link it for you guys. But it is the first 12 Americans to get their black belt in jiu-jitsu. And this would have been through the 90s. I think a lot of us Midwesterners know, like, Chris Howder. Maybe don't know many of the other ones, but there are 12 different pioneers of jiu-jitsu who got their black belts before any other American. And at that point, we can really start to try to look at what jiu-jitsu was in the early to late 90s and then what it ended up becoming and what it is now. And so from my perspective, what I can actually give a true perspective on starts right at the beginning of 2008. And so there was already some cultural shift in jiu-jitsu. But as you guys have heard on the podcast plenty of times where I've gotten to have different OG Midwest guys, and we talk about what jiu-jitsu was in 2008 or even before that from their perspective, it was very much like you showed up, the whole goal was to fight. It really wasn't like how jiu-jitsu is today, where you show up because you heard about jiu-jitsu. It's this really cool art. It sounds like a really good idea. Most people Googled, like, how to fight, and they went to, or maybe not even Googled if it was earlier than that, but they went to a school trying to learn how to fight or trying to challenge somebody to a fight. Jiu-jitsu is done to them, and they said, oh, I've got to learn this. Until UFC 1 came along and everybody saw it in person, or a lot of people got to see it on video later too, Jiu-Jitsu's effectiveness. Really, that was all it was. It was just another martial art. And from there started to become this shift. And I remember when my first ever introduction into jiu-jitsu would have probably been 1999. I was like 5 years old, and my dad had UFC 1. I think he had a few different ones, and played it for me and my brother. And my dad, I didn't realize until I had a son of my own, so until I was 30, it was intentional that I do jiu-jitsu now. Maybe not jiu-jitsu per se, but my dad huge Bruce Lee fan when he was a kid growing up. All he wanted to do was be Bruce Lee. And then he has a chubby Asian son that, under the right lighting could kind of look like Bruce Lee. And we were off to the races. And when I think about all of the movies we watched growing up, I just always tell my wife, yeah, I just always loved all of the karate movies, all of the ninja movies. I was a ninja for Halloween from 5 years old until I stopped trick-or-treating at, I don't know, whatever normal age is, 19, 20 years old when I stopped trick-or-treating. But during that time, I was always influenced by jiu-jitsu or martial arts. And when we saw jiu-jitsu for the first time, we have immediately found a way. My dad, I'm sure, already knew. I'm sure he had a step-by-step plan for getting me into jiu-jitsu, even though he wasn't in jiu-jitsu at the time. We ordered some online tapes, and typical American way, we started a jiu-jitsu business. And I don't think I've ever talked about this on the podcast to you guys. But when I was, we trained for, I would say, 3 years off these tapes where there was a group of us, we would all meet once a week. And eventually my dad ran his own personal training gym in what used to be a garage in our house. And then what used to be a garage in our neighbor's house became a jiu-jitsu school. We matted it and started to actually teach jiu-jitsu out of that in the early 2000s. Those were the jiu-jitsu schools that there were. That's what I'm trying to tell you. It was me at 9 years old, my brother at probably 14, 15, and my dad in his 40s, and we were running one of the only jiu-jitsu schools within 100 miles, and we didn't know anything. We had some VHS tapes, and that was it. We had some, I think you could probably buy some curriculum, and there would be, I always joke about not having moves up on the wall that you have to learn, but that was how we learned jiu-jitsu. There was no other way, and it was like that until, off and on until the Hit Squad was made, in 2008, when I started to actually get to train jiu-jitsu with somebody that knew jiu-jitsu. But again, that was my coach Kyle has been on the show a million times and is still my coach today. When I first met him, he was the first guy that I had ever come into contact with, now at that time 14 years old, that knew jiu-jitsu. I think maybe my dad went to a seminar in, we drove 8 hours and stayed 2 nights so my dad could go to a seminar. Maybe it was a Huron Gracie. No, not Huron Gracie. He would have been way too young. It was a Horian Gracie seminar. And it was just, that was jiu-jitsu at this time. In seeing what it is now, I just don't think that you can debate that there is an American flavor to jiu-jitsu. And I'm not going to, before we even start with I have 3 big impacts that I think that America made on jiu-jitsu. And I think these are all from my point of view, but I really think these are all very obviously true. But when we look at the growth of jiu-jitsu, where it started to where it is now, you can call it any type of jiu-jitsu that you want. But one of my favorite quotes about this, and it wasn't even about this topic, but it was just used quickly on a podcast on the Villain Cast, Chris Payne's podcast. He had Greg Souders on, and they were talking about jiu-jitsu versus grappling in the verbiage. And Greg said something along the lines of, yes, jiu-jitsu is the art, grappling is the action, right? And to me, I think that that is one of the best ways I've ever heard it verbalized, is that jiu-jitsu is the art and grappling is the action. Grappling is what we're doing, right? But then when we look back and we say what works and what is shareable to the next people, and what is useful, to me, that is jiu-jitsu, right? Most of it's interesting. I had one of my purple belts the other day ask me where I learned this move that I was showing him. And I kind of like was surprised that he asked me that. And I was like, dude, I made it up. What are you talking about? Where did I learn this? Where have you ever seen this? And he's like, what do you mean you made it up? How do you do that? And I'm like, well, it's not like I'm not thinking about it going, you know what would be really smart to do next time? I'm going to put my hand here and shift my body here. A lot of times, and this was, I think, Robert Drysdale, when he was on the podcast, did such a good job explaining this. He said that the jiu-jitsu genius doesn't exist, meaning the guy who sits in his office and thinks, oh, this will be the next move, and then I will beat everybody, right? And just outthinks everybody. He said innovation is done by accident. And it's done through experimentation. It's done through just trying different stuff and seeing what works, seeing what doesn't. So when you look at making a jiu-jitsu move, creating your own jiu-jitsu move, all it is you see something that works, and you're setting up your knee cut, and then a few moves happen and you go, oh wow, I'm in side control, awesome. And a lot of times you don't think about that much. And then a couple days later it happens again. A couple days later it happens again. Once it happens like 3 or 4 times, if you make a note of it, that is a jiu-jitsu technique. If it accomplishes the tasks that we are supposed to be accomplishing in jiu-jitsu, it gets you past the guard, it gets you closer to submitting your opponent, or it lets you submit your opponent, it lets you escape, it lets you defend, but it's unique to you, it's unique to your body type, it's just your way of accomplishing a task. That is where jiu-jitsu techniques come from. That's why my jiu-jitsu looks so weird, is because most of it is like what I used to do when I was a purple belt, just totally felt through better and better over the years, and now it looks a lot different than anybody else's stuff, because I really don't like most instructionals. I don't learn from most instructionals. I would say 90-ish, 95% of the instructionals. And it's just always made me try to learn through being on the mat and learn through getting repetition. And with all that being said, with all that out of the way, let's get started on today's episode and actually look at the impacts on jiu-jitsu that America has had, and I'll stop rambling and start rambling about this. So I think the first one, and from my perspective, I actually got to witness this. I 100% know that this is true. If anybody wants to argue segment 1 on me, I will go straight up America on you, and I will call you every name in the book in the comments and not address any of the factual evidence that you put in front of me. And I swear to you, I will do that. But anyway, so the first impact on jiu-jitsu that America had is wrestling culture. And not just wrestling the techniques, but wrestling the culture. I didn't realize this until I got older and I started to meet more and more wrestlers over the years, and they just had certain things culturally that they did. And at least in the Midwest, Midwesterners will tell you, like, yes, wrestling culture has affected jiu-jitsu so much. The way it's trained, the intensity that it is trained, is very much wrestling culture. A lot of the things that people loved about Daisy Fresh, yes, it was old school MMA culture, old school jiu-jitsu culture, but it was also very Midwest born and bred, and it was wrestling culture too. What is the school name now? It is the Daisy Fresh School of Wrestling, something like that. These guys, that culture is built into their gym, and that is a really good depiction of a lot of Midwest gyms that have tough guys. They have this culture of what we lack in technique or understanding today. Today, let's make up for in toughness. Let's make up for in conditioning. These are just the American culture. You see this. We get along with the Philly guys a lot on TAC team, and I think that the culture is very similar. It's not just the culture of the East Coast and the Midwest. I really think it's the wrestling culture. And I really think if you look, that has affected all of jiu-jitsu. When we look at the technique, of course, that has affected jiu-jitsu. If you don't have good wrestling, you can lose to guys who you are significantly better than. For instance, I really thought that J-Rod was going to beat Tynan when they competed in Nogi recently. And what it was J-Rod was out wrestling him. He really wasn't out jiu-jitsuing him, but his ability to turn everything back into wrestling and then complete wrestling, that was, to me, that is why you call it grappling when it's happening. Because it's not just the art of jiu-jitsu. It is who can, within these rules and within this time limit, execute better. It's not about techniques that they know. Sometimes you do stuff and you have no idea. I competed this weekend. I won. It was a rematch for me. Super tough guy submitted me last time a year ago when we competed, and it was the main event in my hometown, and going to be a really, really big win for me or a bad loss, a sad loss, a heartbreaking loss that I've experienced once, and it didn't feel good then. And so a lot of times when you go compete, you'll mess up with your mindset and you'll be like, I have to do this one thing. I have to do this one thing. For me, my game plan was to be on top. I wasn't able to execute that at all. I could not get on top at any point. But while I was threatening that, there were a few different arm lock attempts that were available. One that I go for all the time. And I missed it. I was like, crap, that sucked. I thought I had this. I was still surprised I didn't finish it. Then one that I really never go for, and I was in a situation that I really didn't want to be in, and I was kind of stuck. And one of my black belts, I was in an omoplata, but I was like stuck underneath the guy, and I just don't play that position a ton. But one of my black belts is like omoplata king, and he started giving me coaching. And then I also have one of my best brown belts there. I've got my coach Kyle there. I've got Junior Silva there. I have the little troll Jeff from all of the YouTube videos that you guys see there, yelling profanity and stuff. Just a really perfect group of people right there giving me advice. And it was, we were able to figure out in the moment how to win from there. I was able to get the finish from there. And then just go completely wild. But a lot of times it's like, oh, but what was that technique? People were asking like right off the mat. What did you finish that? I was like, I've got to rewatch it. I'm not really sure. I know what I was attacking earlier, but I was just kind of following a position, trying to figure out something, trying to do what I've seen some of my guys do maybe. But I didn't know for sure. And that is, to me, that is the difference between saying like, oh, yeah, Jiu-Jitsu is the art. It is what we try to pass down, right? But sometimes when we go compete and we're playing the sport of Jiu-Jitsu, it's not the art of Jiu-Jitsu. It's competitive. It is you just try to win, and that is so American wrestling. It is so like, yeah, bro, there are 4 takedowns in wrestling. How crazy is that? Like, there are a billion jiu-jitsu techniques. You can like single leg, double leg, and I said 4 takedowns because I assume there are some other than those 2 takedowns. But no one's ever taught them to me. I guess we can body lock, we can high crotch, which is a single leg. We can hip toss. Ooh, is that wrestling, guys? I don't know. But anyway, not a lot of techniques. So there is a lot of something other than techniques in wrestling. It's why when you get wrestlers in as a coach, it's very common that they can get their blue belt very quickly. It's very common that they can win competitions well because certain things translate. And as you see that more, just naturally, we all like pull those things away. I even remember when I was, oh man, it would have been really early on. I won't give names away just so I don't reveal the secret because this dude could still be doing this to this day. But there was a really good black belt that we knew, and he would he would win so many jiu-jitsu tournaments against high-level guys, big-name guys, and he really didn't play the jiu-jitsu game with them. All he would do is, like, take them down, and it was never judo. It was in the gi, but it was never judo. It was always, like, a low single, a single leg, a double, right? It was one of the 2 takedowns that there are in wrestling. And when we asked him about it, he started like telling us like, yeah, well, I do train with the local college wrestling team and the local high school wrestling team. We're like, really? Why? You're a black belt. And like, yeah, nobody can wrestle in jiu-jitsu. And he's like, all these guys that I'm fighting is, not trying to be racist, but all these Brazilian guys that I'm fighting, they all have great judo. I got to go learn judo from them and then assume that my judo is going to be better than theirs. And that's how, whether or not I get on top for these matches, whether I score those first 2 points, and whether I win these matches. He's like, or I can work on something that they don't, that because I live in the Midwest, I have a ton of access to. And it was groundbreaking for me. I remember when we trained at the Hit Squad, there were all these guys that were like all-American D1 guys that would come into open mat just to thrash me when I was 14 and 15. But they would share so many different things with me. And to me, I was just trying to learn. I didn't realize that they were teaching me wrestling and not jiu-jitsu. I thought we were just learning how to fight. My coach was similar. He always had wrestling built into his jiu-jitsu too. And when we look at that, I think that there is just no argument that that is a thing that has affected jiu-jitsu as a whole. And again, this is not a debate on whether you want to call it Brazilian or American jiu-jitsu, but there is no doubt. It's why I do call it jiu-jitsu, because at this point, what we do now is different. It is in the way it is done, the way it is expressed, the way it is talked about, the amount, the volume of it is different. Just that alone is so different. It makes such a... I remember going to Pans, maybe Panzer Worlds in like 2011 or 12, okay? So just a little over 10 years ago. Going to California, sitting down at a restaurant, and one of our waiters said, "Oh, your shirt, jiu-jitsu. My cousin does jiu-jitsu." And we were blown away. That was the first ever interaction with somebody who knew what jiu-jitsu was. And it was like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. Now, if you wear a jiu-jitsu shirt, somebody at Walmart is going to be like, "Hey, dude, you do jiu-jitsu. I could beat you in a fight," like, oh gosh, you're going to have that. And so, I just think that jiu-jitsu has grown so much, and you just can't argue that, like seeing just how different it was in '08 versus now, it is so obvious that a lot of different cultures have contributed to jiu-jitsu now and what it is. But then I think this is the best thing that America has contributed to jiu-jitsu. And I think that America really, when you look at it, I think America is the source of Creonte culture. So apparently, if you don't know what this word is, I'm going to give you my best definition of it. I don't know for sure because I'm American, but I'll put my own spin on it. I'm American. And so I guess there was like a Brazilian like soap opera, and I guess one of the characters was Creonte, who was always bouncing around to whoever was most successful or doing best at the time. And so in jiu-jitsu, that became this bad word that you call people when they switch teams. And so you don't hear that as much anymore. It's not as big of a thing anymore. You guys have heard me talk about on the podcast, like how you can still try to be respectful of everybody, but leave the place that isn't a good fit for you, right? There are times that makes sense. And there are definitely times that blind loyalty doesn't make sense. And I really think that the American sports mentality plays a role in this. If you guys ever see the movie Basketball, the intro of it is they're making fun of how people will just always switch teams for more money and will always switch teams to be on the winning team in American sports, and how bad the culture of it is, and how over the top the celebration is, and how over the top the endorsement and the sponsorship is. And that is what like the intro to this movie is. But when we see American sports now, and you see, like, you watch basketball and it's like, okay, we're going to get the 3 best guys in the league to all play on our team at once, and then we're just going to win a championship. Like, well, what if that doesn't work? What if we get the 4th best guy? That's a good idea. Let's do it. Let's do it. And so you see that, and you see that in most sports now, that in MLB they'll have a quote unquote salary cap or whatever it is, and or salary tax, and certain teams that are from bigger markets are able to just spend significantly more money, and they win, right? And those players, the best guys, go, hey, I want to make more money. I will go here. This benefits me and my family best. I will be there. That's just American culture. I'm not saying anything bad about it. Tom Brady to the Buccaneers was the greatest thing of all time. Looking back on that Super Bowl, come on. You can hate Brady, but shoot, that's the greatest of all time. That was the best season ever, right? Comes out and gets crushed by the Saints. Okay, sorry, this has nothing to do with jiu-jitsu. But yeah, the team switch can be cool. And some of my favorite training partners and my favorite teammates all came from a different team, myself included. My coach and I have been with the same coach forever, but we weren't originally on tag team. And so, like, that culture is in jiu-jitsu. It was this super negative thing when 2008, when I first heard about it. There wasn't cross training in 2008. When I started my own school in 2015, people were like black belts were advising against me doing open for anybody, open mat, anybody that trains jiu-jitsu. They were like, hey, that's not a good idea. And I was like pushing it. I was, posting it every time that we were doing it once a week. And yeah, people were like, yeah, I don't think that's a good idea. And I just kind of took the risk and did it. I said, well, I don't know. My goal isn't to beat because like here was the argument against it. It was like, well, those guys are going to learn your game. And then what if they can beat you in a competition when they wouldn't have beaten you before, right? One, I think that's an excuse. I think that if they could beat you in the gym and then they beat you in the competition, they were going to beat you anyway, bro. And 2, you should be good enough to be able to learn from their game and benefit from it too. But I would say the biggest thing, when it comes to that argument against cross training, it was more of like they benefit more than you, right? And I think when I started doing it, immediately what I noticed was like, man, not only do I benefit, but my students are benefiting from getting so many different looks, and not just like, I was in my mind, I was teaching them all of jiu-jitsu, and I was teaching them at that time a very, very specific game. Like, I think this is what's going to work for you guys in competition. It was just so specific. And when I look back at that, like, in my mind, I was teaching them all of jiu-jitsu, but the truth was I was teaching them like my individual perspective of jiu-jitsu, and it was very specific. I was a purple belt at the time. It was very specific. And when I started to allow for everybody to come to our open mat, which again in 2015 was wrong. You were not allowed to do that. It brought so many different styles to the gym, and we got to see how our style worked against those, and then steal what worked, and then go, oh, well, they're beating us with this. How do we beat that? How do we stop that? Why is that happening? And to me, it was this huge, huge shift for us, and we started to learn so much faster as an entire team. And so throughout the week, even with one open mat, I was getting better as an athlete because my students were getting better. And so my training partners were getting better. And again, that was not what the way was. This was in 2015, and that was frowned upon. And it's like, looking at it now, that's a lot more common. And, I think we can look at the negative side of Creonte culture. And that is, I think, everything else that I didn't name. That is just the cultural. I wrote it in my notes just so, it's just like okay, this is how I would say it. Is there was too much based in jiu-jitsu on blind loyalty and tradition. There just was. And it was even built into the jiu-jitsu techniques, and that's what turned a lot of people away from the tradition of jiu-jitsu, was the fact that the techniques that had to be shared and were acted like they were sacred and they were passed down, they were kind of like, they didn't work, right? Or they didn't work as well as, or people would figure out like, hey, these are the 15 things that have to be taught to you. Here are 15 things that beat those things. And it was really slow progression in jiu-jitsu because of that. And then when people started to question that and say, hey, maybe shrimping up and down the mats. Dude, I did an episode 5 years ago about how shrimping up and down the mats to warm up was a waste of time, and people were livid. And now it's when you look at Reddit, when you look at YouTube, when you look at podcasts, it is such a common thing that people are like, yeah, I don't like to do that. High level guys, I don't like to do that. I don't think it's useful. And again, the culture has shifted so much, but the problem is the pendulum often can swing in the other direction, where it's like, not only do we not trust the last generation because they lied to us about shrimping up and down the mats, we also can't trust them about belt rank. We can't trust them about gi. We can't trust them about this. We can't trust them about that. And you see why that happens. But it also is one of those things that I don't think it's good. It's good to then just say everything has to be thrown away. If it is like that for you, then maybe do it. But for me, I think you kind of test everything, and there are certain parts of jiu-jitsu culture that I have tested and I just love, and I keep as part of our gym. The biggest thing is like our affiliation, and it isn't. Again, it's different affiliation. I'm sure it's run differently than a lot of people, but I love having a team, and I know I love doing IBJJF tournaments. I know a lot of people don't love doing that, and they hate them, and they have this strong opinion about them. Most of the time, they haven't done them, but again, it's that same. To me, this feels like American culture. This is what I've grown up in and seen so much. It's like you can't just say shrimping up and down the mats is not the most efficient use of time. You have to say it's stupid, and then you have to say anybody who does it is stupid and they're an idiot and we shouldn't talk to them and whatever. And you see that so often. And that's how that pendulum swings back. And I don't think that that's always the best thing for jiu-jitsu either, is to go like, yeah, jiu-jitsu doesn't mean respect. It doesn't mean any of these things. Like, hey, you're doing this to better yourself, right? To respect yourself. And you're doing this with a team, with a group. And there is this sacrifice that you guys put together. And that is like why you get to be in the group, is because, hey, I sacrifice everything being about me so then it can be about all of us getting good together. And then when everybody does that, that group effort of 40 people focused on you getting good together, or you getting good yourself, rather than you just saying, no, I only worry about me, and it being one person focused on you getting good, right? That group effort of getting good together. When I see that, like that is what I think you should strive for when you're training your jiu-jitsu, when you're looking at what to get out of jiu-jitsu. And I think that is, I don't know, that there is jiu-jitsu tradition in that it is about, that was, jiu-jitsu was started by a family, and it's like, it is about family. But that, again, that doesn't mean if like Uncle Ted starts doing weird stuff, Uncle Ted's got to go. It ain't family like that. But it's like if Uncle Ted is struggling and maybe he can't train jiu-jitsu because of it, he's still got his people there. He's still got his jiu-jitsu family. And to me, that is the beautiful part of jiu-jitsu. And I think we shouldn't lose that, right? We shouldn't lose that part of the loyalty, that part of the respect. You can lose all of the blind loyalty and all of the blind respect, especially to people you don't know, whose decisions and whose lives don't actually affect you. But what can I say? That is American culture. So we're going to go ahead and take a quick commercial break, because the commercial break is actually going to introduce us to the next segment. And so let's take it over to Josh, and he'll give us what's going on at simplifyingjujitsu.com. Hey guys, Josh McKinney here. Just wanted to interrupt the podcast really quick and tell you about something really exciting that we have going on at the ISAJJ Jiu-Jitsu Show Pro. So recently we just released our new premium podcast called Master Any Position in 6 Weeks. How this is broken down is with a single goal in mind: for you to identify the most important, the biggest hole in your jiu-jitsu game and fix it. And the idea is you will be able to go up in 6 weeks, one belt level in whatever position you choose. So if you're struggling with bottom side control, if you do what you were supposed to during the 6 weeks, you study like you were supposed to, you step outside of your comfort zone like you were supposed to, you will in that 6 weeks up a belt level in that position. If you are a white belt in that position, you're getting smashed by everybody, you will be blue belt level in that position by the end of 6 weeks. And the reason that this works is not because I created this brilliant idea or this brilliant method, but there are really simple ways to make your jiu-jitsu training more relevant and more effective. And one of the biggest things is focus. And what Master Any Position in 6 weeks does is it gives you a focus. It teaches you how to find new focuses. And most importantly, it kind of challenges you in a way to keep you focused. And so that is Master Any Position in 6 weeks. That is included if you subscribe to the ISAJJ Jiu-Jitsu Show Pro. And that is all I have for you guys. Let's go ahead and get back into the episode. Which brings me to the last point. And this is the third thing that I think America has contributed to jiu-jitsu. And we can call it American Jiu-Jitsu, we can call it whatever we want. But the third thing is just the media and monetization of jiu-jitsu. And people will often look through monetization of sport or in art and always say that is this inherently bad thing. People are trying to profit off jiu-jitsu as if that is this evil idea or something you shouldn't do. But the truth is, a lot of times that motivation and that chasing something and that dedication to the art is a great version of jiu-jitsu. There is a business side of jiu-jitsu, and it is also jiu-jitsu, and it is also a very important role. You see so many people that hate on tournaments, and they hate this tournament, they hate that tournament, and then they love this tournament for a little bit, and then they find some of the same problems, and now they hate that one. And you always see these people jumping around, but what you don't see them doing is starting their own tournament with any success. And the truth is, it's very hard to run a tournament series. It's very hard to find referees, to market it, to make enough money for it to be relevant. And so often, because it is mixing business and jiu-jitsu, it is just inherently evil in most of our minds anyway. And so then if there's any mistake, they're like, these people are just money hungry and they're terrible people. And of course, there are people that are just money hungry and terrible people, but there are people that aren't money hungry and terrible people. And on top of that, there are people that actually do care about the growth of jiu-jitsu, and their efforts go into that. I'm not saying everybody we see is that way, but I do think that regardless, that still grows jiu-jitsu. And the more jiu-jitsu schools that you have on the corners of people's streets, the more people are going to do jiu-jitsu. The more that people on podcasts are discussing how important jiu-jitsu is, people that are not on a jiu-jitsu podcast, the bigger jiu-jitsu is going to grow, right? More people hear about it. More people have a positive view of it. We talked about this earlier in the podcast. When I started, it was just crazy for anyone to know what jiu-jitsu even was that you would interact with on a day-to-day basis. The only time that you knew that people knew what jiu-jitsu was when you went to a tournament. And you're just like, yeah, it's like a bunch of us nerds that watch a very, very niche TV show, and then we finally all get to hang out together. And that's what jiu-jitsu tournaments were for a long time. And now, good and bad, there is so much through the media, through obviously social media too. There is so much more presentation of jiu-jitsu. There is so much more pushing out there, and there is so much more money to be made. So there's going to be more people trying to start their podcasts, start their YouTube channels, start selling their instructionals in some way or another. And these things all drive jiu-jitsu. The fact that I own a jiu-jitsu school allows me to dedicate so much more time to jiu-jitsu. The fact that it makes enough money to provide for us. It allows me to dedicate more time to jiu-jitsu. It allows me to get better as a teacher, which then allows me to have a better jiu-jitsu school. And if we don't have that financial piece of that flywheel, there's going to be a point where I just can't dedicate more time to jiu-jitsu. Like, I have other responsibilities. I have to dedicate more time to making money elsewhere. And so, that being said, it's like, we'll kind of dig in a little bit with just some random thoughts, because the media of jiu-jitsu is still so undefined, right? Because media right now is undefined, and then jiu-jitsu is so new still, and it's still growing so much. It is so undefined. If you Google, or you go on YouTube and you search best jiu-jitsu podcast episodes, there will be some really not surprising contenders. It's like Hodger Gracie talking to Lex Friedman, and then maybe one of the Joe Rogan episodes, maybe Joe Rogan and John Danaher, something like that. But then when you look and you scroll down a little more, the podcasts get way more random than even the ISAJJ Jiu-Jitsu show. We are still in a very early stage of all of these shows, because jiu-jitsu is still in an early stage. I think this was 2 years ago. I did an episode talking about when we see how much jiu-jitsu is growing right now. And it was more encouraging people to go try to do things on social media, jiu-jitsu related, to try to have a jiu-jitsu related Instagram or YouTube channel or podcast or t-shirt company or rash guard company or mat cleaner company or finger tape company, just something in the jiu-jitsu space. And I was just trying to encourage people. There's always this thought when it comes to anything that I've ever tried to pursue online, people would always be like, oh, that ship has sailed. You can't do email marketing anymore. That ship has sailed. People do it still to this day, right? And they said that 15 years ago that was dead. People will say you can't start a podcast right now. There's just too many podcasts. There's just no reason to. Shouldn't start a YouTube channel. There's too many. There's no reason to. And maybe for some people that is true. Maybe it is just a shiny object that you're chasing. But for others, if you put in the time now without any expectation that something has to return for you immediately, you don't have to be like, oh, well, I better get something. I better be able to work full-time doing jiu-jitsu next year if I put this time in. Don't expect that. But if you put time in now and just say, I'm going to consistently put time into whatever this jiu-jitsu thing is that is business related and that is fun for me. For a lot of us, that's going to be teaching private lessons, or I always give this example. If you are a police officer, it could be teaching police officers. If you're a firefighter, it could be teaching firefighters. It could be something more niche. But regardless, if you choose to do it, if you just decide you're going to be consistent for the next 5 years at it, I know that's a crazy amount of time to suggest, but really 5 years, 3 years-ish, 5 years probably would be best. And you just stay consistent at it. Jiu-jitsu in that time, in the next 5 years, is going to have evolved so much. This thing that you're doing will actually a lot of times help you stay in jiu-jitsu yourself. This little business that makes a little money might keep you on the mats and just keep you involved in jiu-jitsu in maybe ways that you wouldn't. But at the end of the 5 years, even if you really hadn't pursued it too much, you just stayed consistent on your YouTube channel, on making your Instagram posts, whatever, you will have so much opportunity and options that you wouldn't have had had you have not done that. And I can say this 100% as fact to you guys because that is the place that I'm at in life right now. I've had this podcast for, oh my gosh, a long time, 5 years. And in that, or almost 5 years, I think 4 and maybe 8 months. And in that time, I really have not made very much money off the podcast directly. I'll just hit you guys with a number of money that I have made directly from the podcast, and people, because this is America, right? So if it's an American episode, we're going to talk money. We're going to talk financial numbers, and I'll come clean to you guys. I have altogether through what you make money on a sponsor or on a podcast with through sponsorships, have made in the last 5 years, $0 on the ISAJJ Jiu-Jitsu show. 0. One time somebody sponsored my podcast and then didn't send me money. And so I ran a commercial or two, but yeah, I didn't get the money. So still $0. But indirectly, I've done really well with my podcast. I've gotten seminars that I know for sure that I wouldn't have gotten because I wouldn't have even known those people if they didn't listen to my podcast. And I would have had no way to extend that offer if they didn't listen to my podcast. And most likely, they wouldn't have cared about me extending that offer if I hadn't been helpful to them over the last few years. And helpful with really asking nothing in return besides 5-star reviews. I don't ask for those much, but we really kill it on the 5-star reviews. You guys are amazing. If you haven't given a 5-star review, you still should. But man, I know that some of the ISAJJ Jiu-Jitsu show listeners have bots or something to give me extra reviews because Lord knows that the show is not as good as you guys act like it is. But in that time of me having this podcast, I have gotten I got to commentate at Worlds. I don't commentate on jiu-jitsu events. This is the first jiu-jitsu event I have ever commentated on in my life, except for when I walked off the mat at Respect 4, and I think they just had me like walk behind the camera and talking to the mic as like a little interview, and then I talked about the match that was going on, and then I left. But I got to commentate at Worlds. That was an ISAJJ Jiu-Jitsu show thing. That wasn't a Josh's Jiu-Jitsu skill thing, as much as we all wish that it was. It's just not. It's because I dedicated time to a brand, and that brand was built around helping people and something that I enjoy doing. And that has, that really has allowed for so many different things for me. But again, you just have to start and then be consistent, right? And so I know it's different for everybody, and I don't want to be too specific and be like, oh, it needs to be jiu-jitsu media or something like that. For a lot of people, it just needs to be, you just need to teach jiu-jitsu. You just need to post about the private lessons that you've been wanting to share for a long time. And not only that, it's going to help you become a better teacher. It's going to set you up in the long run. It's going to show your family, hey, this actually is something that can make money. And I just think that it's really easy to just say it's not the right fit for you in jiu-jitsu. Like, oh yeah, I'm just a hobbyist. I can't be teaching or whatever. And I just think that's silly. I just think, a really cool thing that Henry Aiken said in the last podcast was that anytime you try something new, you're a white belt in it. And we don't realize that, but like he was talking about jiu-jitsu concepts, and he's like, yeah, you started as a white belt in this concept. And I'm like, yeah, I really did. I felt that I was a white belt in that concept. You're going to start as a white belt in your podcast. You're going to start as a white belt in your whatever you decide to do, in your teaching. You may know a lot of jiu-jitsu, but if you've never taught it, you probably are a terrible teacher. You're going to suck at it at first, but the only way to get good at something that you suck at is to keep doing it. I remember, and this is kind of back to YouTube, but I remember I was watching a video from Mr. Beast, like the most famous YouTuber, and he was talking about how to grow a YouTube channel, like how to get good at YouTube. And he goes, you dedicate yourself to make 100 videos, and every single time you make a new video, you try to do something a little better. Just, make the thumbnail a little better, make the intro a little better, make the audio better, make the lighting better, whatever. But every single time. And he's like, and that's how you get good. It's like, because then you will have 100 times where you got a little better. He's like, you're going to be wrong. You're going to learn from your mistakes. And then he goes, and then if you want to really good, get 4 friends to do it with you. Because if you have 4 friends and you're all texting each other saying, oh, this didn't work. This was a bad idea. I wasted my day trying to change this, trying to fix this, trying to make this better. It didn't make it better, but you guys learned a lesson. And then instead of just one of you learning, you all 5 learn it, and all 5 of you don't have to try it, right? And so that idea is, we talked about at the beginning of this episode, that idea is how you get good at jiu-jitsu with a group of people, is you don't just focus on you focus on the team. When the team is getting better, when your training partners are better, it makes you better. It's just how these things work. And so, where am I at in my exam? Oh yeah, this is the point of, like, and when we see that with Jiu-Jitsu YouTube, I think we could all agree that there's a lot of space in it. There's a lot of, I don't know. Okay, so I'm trying to not say anything mean here, but Jiu-Jitsu YouTube pretty much sucks, right? It's not, I'm not saying that all the YouTubers are bad or something like that. Some of them can come off in a way that is not my favorite thing, come off a little, I don't know, arrogant. And some of them, maybe they are skilled enough to be arrogant, but it's like, I don't know, in jiu-jitsu, you have to beat up some really tough guys to be so arrogant, right? I don't know. Regardless, let's not even talk about that. Let's just skip over that part. All I'm saying is, I think there's a lot of room for improvement in jiu-jitsu YouTube. And so or in jiu-jitsu podcasts and jiu-jitsu businesses, probably everything but like what BJJ Fanatics does. They do a pretty good job of that. And speaking of, random shout out of the day, there's may or may not be a deal made with BJJ Fanatics that would give you guys the chance to buy the Trinity of Guard Passing without having to subscribe to the ISAJJ Jiu-Jitsu Show Pro. We're still on the fence. We'll see. We'll see what happens, but I'll keep you guys updated. You guys will be the first to know, except for the people on the Geek Gazette. Let's go ahead and finish off today's episode. Just have a few different thoughts, and I thought that it would be fun to kind of end, and that is the future of American Jiu-Jitsu, right? So we talked a lot about the three components that I see that have really influenced jiu-jitsu over the last 20 years. And through this, I think that it's hard to argue that any of those points. But then, just as Americans, what is our future in jiu-jitsu? What are we supposed to be focused on? And so I always will kind of reference that my generation coming up, the American jiu-jitsu thing was that we were going to like outsmart everybody technically. And I just, when you look at it, that just hasn't been the case. It has not been this, we're going to just go and outsmart everybody. And so as guys competing in jiu-jitsu in America, I really think the biggest thing that you could be doing is focusing on how you are training. I know what you are training is very important, but we talked about BJJ Fanatics. They have like 2,600 instructionals, and almost all of them are dedicated to the what we should be doing on the mat, right? Like the jiu-jitsu stuff, the techniques. Very, very few of them are dedicated to the how we should be getting good at these things. And so when we look at jiu-jitsu, I think that there is still a lot to be discovered when it comes to the growth of getting good, or the evolution of getting good at jiu-jitsu very quickly. And I think the worst thing that we could do is start to become single-minded in any way. And so for American jiu-jitsu, and this is my opinion, some random Illinois dude who's wearing an American flag jiu-jitsu kimono right now that was probably made in Pakistan. But when it comes to jiu-jitsu growth, and that's jiu-jitsu business growth, jiu-jitsu media growth, jiu-jitsu technique growth, jiu-jitsu competition growth, the worst thing that I think that we can do, and it is pretty much the American way, is to get way too single-minded and to say, this is the one tournament that is relevant, and then everything else is trash, and this is all I care about. This is the one type of jiu-jitsu that is relevant, everything else is trash, this is all I care about. I know it's currently, these tournaments, it's currently the gi versus no gi debate, it's currently the American jiu-jitsu versus Brazilian jiu-jitsu debate, and those are like the current ones. But being in jiu-jitsu a long time, these debates have been the same over and over. It was like self-defense versus sport jiu-jitsu. And of course that debate still goes, but it's way less common, right? And then it's like jiu-jitsu and MMA, right? And that was a really big one, was like people still were like, yeah, you don't need jiu-jitsu to be an MMA fighter. And so there were all these weird jiu-jitsu debates, and there always are going to be these weird jiu-jitsu debates. It's not wrong to have an opinion, but when you can't see the other side of the coin, when you go, this is the one training method, designated winner is the only training method that there is. It's not. There's a bunch of other ways to train. Figure out what works for you. Mess with it. Maybe what works for you now won't work for you a couple years from now. And so keep messing with it. Keep tweaking it. Don't get single-minded. As soon as you do that, we stop evolving. We stop getting better. And so when I talk about this whole idea of 40 guys in the room all trying to get each other better for no other reason but to get better themselves, that's how American Jiu-Jitsu should be. Yes, we compete against each other. Yes, we hate this gym because they shrimp, and we hate this gym because they practice with weapons, and we hate this gym because they spell jiu-jitsu J-U instead of J-I-U. And you always have that. But the truth is, none of that stuff matters, dude. If you just said, well, you know what? I could help all these gyms a little bit if they wanted to, if they wanted to collaborate. And then maybe a few years from now, they could help me. Maybe not. But if we focus on jiu-jitsu that way, the growth of the sport as a whole, the growth of the art as a whole will explode. But the mentality of us against them, I'm right and they're wrong, that is in jiu-jitsu so much and so heavy. Just basically anything you see on jiu-jitsu Reddit. I think that those things are probably slowing us down. And if we just said, you know what? You can watch CJI and then record ADCC and watch that right after, or vice versa. And no one cares. It's not a big deal. You don't have to hate one to love the other, right? You can train in the gi in the morning that you're good at, and then go train no gi and be terrible at it. And it's okay. You don't have to be like, oh no, well, I'm a gi guy now. Don't do that. Just enjoy jiu-jitsu. Quit being so single-minded. Quit closing yourself off to things. And I promise jiu-jitsu will be so much better for you. But if we all do it, jiu-jitsu would be so much better for all of us. And so that is my very, very random thoughts today on this 4th of July holiday. Thank you guys for listening to today's episode. I believe that is all I have for you. Be sure to get on the Gi Gazette if you want to know more about what we have coming out in the ISAJJ Jiu-Jitsu show and just all of the different stuff we do with the YouTube channel. And be sure to subscribe to the channel, subscribe to wherever you're listening to this podcast from. And I hope today's episode helps you guys suck just a little bit less at jiu-jitsu. Have a great day, guys.